What's going on, guys? Tonight we are going to talk about the miracles of plant medicine, and we're actually going to talk a little bit about some really effective aphrodisiacs and also the proper context. I get a lot of questions about sort of the ethics of plant medicine and sex, and it's a topic that I have completely avoided for years, so finally going to talk about that a little bit. And then also the entourage effect, mostly because I was doing research for a coca recipe, coca flour. For those of you that, I do have a little bit in my cheek here. So you can actually make flour out of the coca leaf and make food with it. And so I was doing research for this recipe video that I did, and it hit me that every single constituent in the coca plant is geared towards the same thing. So, you know, it's really almost evidence for creationism, because it's just so insane that you have this plant that has the cocaine alkaloid, right? And actually a bunch of what are they called, like analogs of cocaine that give you energy, you know, and it's only 1%, so, you know, it's not like doing cocaine, but it gives you energy to work. And then there are a bunch of alkaloids that all have different purposes, but they flush toxins. So then you also have a ton of calcium. Calcium is what activates the alkaloids in the coca plant. So, you know, it just really struck me, and this is something I've noticed before, but particularly with coca, all of the vitamins, the enzymes, the alkaloids, they all support the same sort of effect, you know. They give you greater stamina. It provides a bunch of minerals and vitamins and protein and all of these things to compensate for the fact that, you know, maybe you don't have food and that's why you're chewing. And then it's a higher altitude plant and it offsets altitude sickness. So there's this like insane synergy between all the alkaloids in the plant that work together to cover all the bases, you know, and it's just really an extraordinary thing, I think, to be aware of. There's also the fact that we have plants that don't have any function on their own and only work together when we combine them, and like ayahuasca. And that's, you know, really interesting as well, but what's really compelling to me is how so many, including mushrooms, right? A lot of mushrooms actually have serotonin precursors, and they also recently discovered that psilocybin mushrooms have the same Harmala alkaloids that ayahuasca has. And psilocybin is actually an analog of DMT. It's like 5-phosphoryloxy dimethyltryptamine as opposed to N-dimethyltryptamine. So in the same way that Harmala alkaloids, not only, it's not just that the Harmalas neutralize the salt in your stomach and cause the DMT to become active. They also open the experience up. It slows down the DMT, which is, you know, if you smoke pure DMT or even take Yopo, it's so rapid and intense. The onset is so immediate, and it just kind of flings you into hyperspace. And it's like this insane onslaught of super intense hyperdimensional activity. And, you know, it can be a little bit difficult to extract meaning. And, you know, it's just, you're just going like, okay, that was really weird and insane, but what was the point? You know, a lot of times, at least, that's how DMT is for me. But with the Harmala alkaloids, there's like this feminine aspect that's added, and the depth of the experience opens up, and there's more of a feeling of having a guide present, and it puts you more in touch with your body. The Harmala alkaloids almost like it's like the interdimensional experience cerebrally, consciously or intellectually, mentally, the psyche stuff. It gives that interdimensional experience to the body as well, and allows the body to go through the same sort of process of shining the light where you can't normally see, and giving you a sort of integration with this new layer, a deeper layer of relationship with the body. Another really interesting thing about the entourage effect with ayahuasca is that I noticed years ago that shamans that I know that drink, 3 or 4 times a week for, I don't know, my teacher now, probably 15 years, he's vomiting all the time, but there's no tooth enamel problems like you would have with a bulimic. The reason for that is that the ayahuasca actually alkalizes your stomach acids. It neutralizes them. So your throat isn't damaged when you vomit. Let me just check in with the chats real quick, make sure we're good. Okay. It doesn't do any damage when you vomit. And people's teeth are not affected, even if they've been drinking ayahuasca for, day after day, week after week, year after year. So it's just a really extraordinary thing. And also San Pedro, people know that the mescaline, what the function of the mescaline is, and we all know that it's psychoactive, but there are actually a whole entourage of other alkaloids that support and modify the experience, right? So different strains of San Pedro, even different cactuses, will have a noticeably different effect. And that can be useful, because, for example, the classical San Pedro is much lighter and softer, I guess, than, say, Peruvian torch, which is kind of dark and more harsh. Not necessarily in a bad way, but it just kind of applies to sort of different scenarios. Speaking of San Pedro and this whole question of aphrodisiacs, there really isn't a better medicine for connecting with your partner in that way. The depth of the experience, the intensity of the experience, I don't know that any other altered state can compete with San Pedro. The combination of LSD and MDMA can be pretty extraordinary, and it's definitely worth noting that clinical research has been done, and couples that had therapy in conjunction with MDMA that were on the verge of divorce, 85% were still together 5 years later, as opposed to the mean without it of like 11%. So that's pretty huge. But another aspect besides just the, general aphrodisiac and the sort of sense of holiness that the cactus confers in that context. And by the way, one of the most amazing things you can possibly do is combine cacao, cinnamon, tonka bean, coconut milk, and fresh cacao juice. When you get a cacao pod, the pith inside, there's like this white pith that coats all of the seeds, and there's a little bit on the inside of the pod. You put it in a nut sack and strain the milk out of the nut sack. I don't really know what the name is. I think that, they're called nut sacks. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a white cloth, and you put, Enrica, are those things actually called nut sacks? Anyways, Yeah, and you strain it, mix it with the coconut milk. You can add some cacao, like, fermented and processed cacao paste. And, yeah, the tonka bean, cinnamon. I'm trying to think if there was anything else you put in there. But yeah, that, and drink it with the San Pedro. Oh, Bobansana, some Bobansana extract. If you want to have the most beautiful, deep, connected, emotionally open experience possible with your partner, moderately strong dose of San Pedro, that drink that I just mentioned, and some coca. Thank me later. Truly extraordinary. And the other side of that coin, though, is that on a personal level, having grown up with a mother who was not only a narcissist, but also a sexual abuse victim, which is probably why she became a narcissist. She really, like, I started hearing, like, men are pigs, like, at like 4. She would talk about this all the time. So I developed this kind of complex where I couldn't even look at, whatever partner I had. And, if like I saw her leg and had a lusty response, then I would like turn my head and feel ashamed, San Pedro is the most powerful medicine for developing a healthy relationship with sexuality if you were lacking that. By the way, you guys, I'm not going to be able to stream very late tonight, so I want to make sure I mention this before I have to shut her down, because we are marching up into the mountains tomorrow to drink San Pedro and have yopo, and have to get up pretty early for that. But our retreat is August and September this year, and it is going to be near Pisac, and we are going to go to ruins. We are going to have bufo combo, ayahuasca only probably once at the end, rape, and we have developed a rape that actually has sananga powdered sananga root in it. I was actually taught this at the rape making circle with Huni Kuin people a few weeks ago, and I was totally unaware that this was a thing. And speaking of synergetic plant medicine combinations, to put sananga with rape is just absolutely brilliant, because rape has an extraordinary ability to dislodge things that are stuck. The best evidence that I can give you for that, from my experience, is that when I administer it to people for the first time, they usually vomit, but then they never vomit again. And my theory about that is that it gets in there and dislodges something, and that thing is actually gone, once you purge. I don't see any other reason, because it can't be a matter of tolerance. It can be weeks, later, a week between administering more rape, and there's no vomiting. So it's, that's my theory. And that theory is partly based on the fact that a lot of shamans, tabaqueros, who specifically work only with tobacco, they'll actually juice fresh tobacco and drink it until they have visions. Extremely dangerous, not recommended unless you have training. This is not something that you can even really just dieta and then just do. You can drink tobacco and, from fermented mapacho. You still shouldn't do that without an experienced person present, but it's not for medicinal purposes versus visionary purposes. The dose is much, much different. So, speaking of rape, I have to blow my nose. But then sananga, on the other hand, it was kind of the same way, in my experience at least. The first time that I had Sanaga during an ayahuasca ceremony, which is absolutely the best time to take it at the peak of the visions, it was like getting washed from the inside, like a spiritual bath, an internal cleansing on a level that I've never experienced. It was so blissful, and I just felt so clear, and the visions became so extraordinarily clear and beautiful, and I could see for like 10 miles, and it was just this cliff face with these sort of Incan sun god looking faces with flames coming out of their pupils, and it looked like real fire. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. But every time I've taken Sanaga during ayahuasca after that, it's never been that intense, and other people have correlated that. So I really do attribute that to these plants actually resolving some kind of block. In fact, the Quechua call it panema, and it's like they say when you have panema, you'll lose motivation and you'll become sluggish and depressed, and then Sanaga clears that out. So when the Hunikuin Pahe, their shaman, told me about this Sanaga Rape, I was really excited to find out that that was a thing. And yeah, so we have that available for you guys out there. And so where was I at in this tale? Oh, so we were talking about the retreat, I guess. We were already having, I think, 3 or 4 repeat guests. So I think that's really cool that we have a group that already knows each other as like the base. And they all have experience. One of them worked with me for a month. So yeah, really excited to see some old friends and meet some new people. And it's going to be at a horse ranch, so we'll have the local guides. They'll teach you how to ride Peruvian style, which is very different from Western or English style. And they say Peruvian horses are the smoothest. And the horses do this crazy dance where they flip their hooves to the side when they walk. And the woman that owns the horse ranch was telling me that they don't teach them to do that. They just naturally do it, which is odd. But anyways, do me a favor too and hit the like button, share, subscribe, and consider becoming a patron. We are at 95. If we can get 5 more, we'll have 100 for the first time in a really long time. That would be epic. So, yeah, all right. So we talked about the mushroom entourage effect, the coca entourage effect, the mescaline entourage effect a little bit. And, okay, so continuing along with the aphrodisiac theme a little bit, I have personally discovered that the combination of maca, lion's mane, and Juanarpo. Juanarpo is a root that's similar to maca. It may even be related that grows here, but it's much, much stronger and much less well known. And also just for general libido, for energy from day to day. And the lion's mane actually is about neurogenesis. But anything you can do to get more blood to the brain is going to be very beneficial for this. So, I know that's not a whole lot of information, but that's what I've got in terms of using plant medicine for aphrodisiacs. I occasionally get questions about ayahuasca and sex, and I would say that messing around with your serotonin levels, especially if you're under the age of, say, 27, is extremely dangerous. So I have heard reports of people doing this, and they're fine, but it is not advisable. Another thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is the lasting effect of the changes in consciousness that are conferred by plant medicines. So, one of the criticisms that we used to get back in the day when people were a lot more ignorant about plant medicines and psychedelics in general, is that, you get high, you have these revelations, and you come down and you're just back to your normal life. And I've never, ever seen that in a person. I mean, very rarely is a person unchanged by any kind of transcendental experience. I feel like the people that would say that sort of thing were inexperienced or cynical or, maybe stupid, because as Terence McKenna said, psychedelics don't work on stupid people. So maybe that was the problem. Not really sure, but I just wanted to give you guys a couple of examples of the sort of thing that happens after the fact, right? In terms of the increased connectivity and telepathy and enhanced precognition, and I think one of the easiest ways to understand what happens here is that when you take psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, it doesn't matter which one, this happens to varying degrees depending on which compound you take, but the communication between the different hemispheres of the brain, I think, is indicative of the fact that you're sort of building a bridge between the conscious and the subconscious mind. And our pattern recognition comes from the subconscious. So when you increase the communication between the conscious and the subconscious, you start to have more accurate precognitions. And what's up, Nick? I've talked a lot about those experiences, but something happened recently that was really wild. And it even suggests that, it suggests one of two things. Either ayahuasca is telling us the truth about, the other world and all the sort of spiritual information and insights that we get from it. I'm not suggesting you should believe everything that it says. The other possibility, speaking of not believing everything that it says, is that it tells us all the same lies. But I went on a walk, no psychedelics involved, with a friend a couple months ago, and we walked up to this ruin. We walked up to this ruin that is like right behind my house, and I was talking about how ayahuasca once told me that, let's back up a little bit. So my mom had just committed suicide, and I had this experience where there were these spirit beings dancing around me in a circle. My mom came down, and she was angry and skeletal and blue flames coming out of her eyes. And the message was basically that the reason that you're not supposed to commit suicide is that you get stuck in that state. And it's actually harder to pull yourself back together on the plane of pure consciousness. So, that was a little unsettling, because basically the message was, your mom's not at rest. She's, tormented and floating around. And eventually she went away, and I went out into the jungle and had a little ritual with the mapacho to kind of come to terms with that. And as I was walking back, ayahuasca said, I have something to tell you. And I said, what is that? And she said, your mom didn't go into the stars. She went into Enrica's womb. And I was like, shit, because we definitely weren't planning to have any children. And and she said, I can explain to you why that happens. I said, okay. And she said, well, think of an atom with protons and neutrons spinning around a nucleus. Human souls are the same way. So we have this concept of soul family, right? And so ayahuasca was basically saying that that's true and real. And it's because in the physical world, everything is sort of a reflection of this one single process, like it's holographic. And so I was telling my friend this story, right? So basically the bullet point of it is that your mom and your wife and your kids are always the same souls in every lifetime, sort of oscillating around this nucleus. And so the next day, I go into the local club to book a gig, and the owner's there. And somehow we start talking about ayahuasca. And first he starts telling me that, he'd only drank once with this Brazilian shaman. And that sounds like she gave them an incredibly high dose, because he said that at one point he stood up and he was out of his body, and he walked over and laid down into his brother's body. And he said he wished he hadn't done that, because he found out all sorts of stuff about his brother that he wished he didn't know. And then when he got up, his brother started bawling, because apparently all that stuff had been going through his mind at that time. And then he looked at the shaman, who was a woman, and he thought, I'm going in there. And she goes, you will not enter here. And so he's like, fair enough. And he laid back down in his body, and he said he started going through all these past lives. And he realized that his wife and his children and his mom were all the same people that had been, that in every lifetime, it's the same souls revolving around this nucleus. And I had literally been talking to my friend I'm in the middle of nowhere, Peru, and just happened to have this conversation with these two people. And this guy's only drank ayahuasca one time. So what I'm getting at here is that once you've had these experiences and you have expanded the parameters of your what's available to you to experience, it doesn't stop when the ayahuasca wears off. It doesn't stop when the LSD wears off. I mean, even old hippies will tell you that when you take LSD, you never actually come down. And I think that a lot of this perception of hyper-persistent perceptual disorder that people talk about is really just the fact that people aren't expecting psychedelics to actually expand their consciousness. And so, for example, we only perceive like less than 1% of the full spectrum of light. But after we've taken psychedelics, a lot of times, like for me now, when I look at a white wall, it's not really a white wall. It's very faint, but I can see those like translucent color patterns sort of faintly, but they're there, all the time. And I think that's because the filters don't go all the way back up. They're not supposed to. This is what the evolution of consciousness is partly about, that as we develop as a species or a race or whatever it is, Justin says that I speak a lot of tangible introspection. That sounds good, so thank you, I guess. So the filters stay down. And so telepathy happens more often, precognition happens more often, these strange sort of synchronistic experiences happen more often, partly because you've established a greater level of homeostasis. And I think that, and this actually blew my mind just the other day, I've been talking about how, I felt that there was a higher order of symmetry that is the mechanistic reason why we experience synchronicities, right? So when you create greater balance between the subconscious and the conscious mind, it translates into experiencing greater symmetry with your internal universe and your external experience, right? And just the other day, I was watching a video, and he was reading from Jung, and Jung said, there are higher orders of symmetry, and that's why we experience synchronicity. It just blew my mind to realize that, this sort of intuition that I had, that the guy that coined the term synchronicity had also explained it in that way. So I think it's probably correct. And I'll give you guys another even more dramatic example of this sort of experience. One of the first times that I did Wilca, which is like Yopo, it's a related tree. It's almost completely identical. Supposedly, the ratios of different forms of DMT are not the same. I'm about to find out tomorrow, because at the end of the San Pedro ceremony, I'm going to have some Yopo too. And so my girlfriend, or, well, she's more than a girlfriend now, but she was a girlfriend at the time, same partner I have here. She had this cat that wasn't very friendly, really, so this was really unusual when this happened. But we did the Wilca, and suddenly she said, I can talk to the cat. And the cat had just come around the corner of the stairs, and I see them look at each other, and the cat runs up on the bed, and they get nose to nose, and they're like making all these mewing sounds, like meow, meow, like really crazy, almost like when cats are mating or something. And then they both get like visibly upset. Like the cat is crying is the best way I can describe it. It's like burying its head in the blankets and obviously distressed, and Enrica's bawling her eyes out, and I'm just sitting there going like, oh my God, like we've really broken our brains this time. And so the next day, I go to town, and in order to do that, you actually had to walk through the neighbor's hippie commune. His name was Mufufu. Don't ask me. R.I.P. Mufufu. He passed away from cancer about a year ago, I think. He was a really interesting character. He was a bagel assembly guy, basically just worked at a bagel shop for probably minimum wage. And then his brother somehow got super rich and gave him like millions and millions of dollars. So he went from like bagel shop employee in San Francisco to like, ridiculously wealthy just all of a sudden. And so he was a really interesting guy, didn't do a lot of psychedelics or anything, and somehow, for some reason, he had a hippie commune anyways. But anyways, so I go walking through his property, and he comes up to me and he's like, do you think that maybe consciousness is like a unified field, and we could even sometimes have telepathy with a cat or a dog? And I'm just speechless for a second, like, good morning, Mufufu, like what? I had literally just watched someone get into some kind of weird preternatural telepathic, mental breakdown with a shared mental breakdown with a cat the night before. And then this guy comes up to me and just says this. The first person I see, that's not random. There's no way that's random, So, just kind of making the point here that when we talk about healing with psychedelics, we generally think about the traumas that we're healing, the emotional damage and creative blocks and post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety and all of these things. But I think that we sort of undervalue the fact that our psyches are fragmented in a way that most of us are not even aware. Oh yeah, natural state knows Mufufu. That's weird that there's someone in the chat that actually knew him. Yeah, natural state's mentioning something about having a strange experience with cats. I have another psychedelic cat story that I'll share in a minute, but what I was saying is that, we have this fragmentation of our psyches and our being that we were almost born with. It comes from the conditioning of our culture. It comes from, the younger ones among us, particularly affected by this social media, attention span sort of fragmenting stuff. And one of the things that leads to transcendental states of mind is continuity of consciousness, right? An unbroken stream of awareness that doesn't have any dissonance or interference patterns in it. And so in our society, we're kind of taught to believe that a lot of the experiences that happen during and after ayahuasca or DMT are indications that you're insane, and they're denied by the culture at large. And I think that it's actually normal for us to have those capacities to a greater extent than we do. So this restoration of our telepathic, intuitive, precognitive capacities is actually a form of healing. You know, it's not really even necessarily development of superhuman shamanic powers. It's a redintegration. It's a restoration to a former state of our fragmented consciousness. And, you know, it's an amazing thing. It's a really... one of the best antidotes I think we have to the existential crisis that we are experiencing almost globally. By the way, you guys, keep an eye out for a stream I'm going to do. I really would like to avoid polarizing political stuff, but I have to do this at this point. I was just made aware that the Republican Party has put together a 900-page plan for what they're going to do when Trump is reelected, and it is exactly what I predicted. Complete totalitarian fascist dictatorship coup. It is exactly the worst case scenario and exactly what I predicted they were going to do in 2020. So, you know, I'm hesitant to do it because I know I have a lot of right-wing subscribers and people that are really diehard Trump supporters, but nothing can save any of them from the fact that they fell for another trap. Just like Obama was a trap for the left to, you know, convince them all that the government was their friend. And, you know, Obama was like this cool black guy, so now the left is all, you know, bootlicky. And I'm sorry to tell you this, you guys, but this whole thing was a trick and a trap, and it was really, really obvious. But now that I've read a little bit of this 900-page thing that they're planning, they're trying to dismantle the government, and basically all of your freedoms are gone. And I mean, think about it. How much freedom could survive 900 pages of new laws? Like, it really is worst case scenario. So watch out for that, because I'm going to take a bunch of time and go through it and find the most important stuff. Hopefully someone else has done it for me already and kind of consolidated the worst of it somewhere. But it's something we really all need to be aware of. And yeah, unfortunately, Justin, I don't think they're balancing shit. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that's not how I'm reading this. Vermin Supreme, yeah, I hear you. Nobody for president. That's what, who was that clown that emceed Woodstock? Wavy Gravy. Nobody for president. No, he said, nobody lies, nobody steals, or nobody doesn't lie, nobody doesn't steal, nobody for president, or something like that. And that's basically my solution, is that we have to evolve the human race to the point where people realize that we don't need to be governed, and that's the only solution. It really is. You know, everyone's looking for some leader to come along and fix everything, or maybe this party's going to do it, or this party's going to do it, or RFK, or whatever. And the reality is that until we're self-governing, we're fucked. Period. End of story. So yeah, let's see how long. Man, only 38 minutes. All right, so if you guys have any questions or topics for me, you can pump them into the chat, and I will do my best to address them. I feel like there was definitely some other plant stuff that I had intended to tackle, but it is eluding me at the present moment. So, plant medicine miracles. That, I guess, you know, something that I should probably talk about is that I really have been disappointed, I think, by the lack of evidence that people are really genuinely having their consciousness expanded in the way that I would have expected with the popularity of plant medicine and psychedelics being what it is. Of course, I'm a little bit I'm not in the United States. I'm not on the ground there, so I'm not 100% sure of what's going on. But just based on what I see on social media and live streams and interactions with people, it really seems like here's a good way to explain it, right? Like, after almost every ayahuasca ceremony I've ever colis relief. Yeah, probably. Let me make sure I know what that is. Or is it colic or colis? Colic, probably, is what you're asking about. You mean for babies? I'm not sure what you're asking, I guess. Colitis. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, coca. Any kind of gastrointestinal issues, coca is a good help for that. But since there are ulcers involved, sangre de drago, it's called, I think grado de drago here. They have a different name for it. It has been studied clinically, and the researchers said that it sort of empowered the blood cells, the red blood cells, I believe, to rebuild damaged tissue. To an extent that defied scientific understanding. So the one thing you have to be aware of taking sangre de drago internally is that it does pretty much kill, cacao too. He says cocoa. No, not cocoa, coca, the coca leaf. I can send harina de coca, is powdered coca, coca flour. I can't send whole leaves. But yeah, coca. And then sangre de drago, but when you take sangre de drago internally, it kills everything. So you have to rebuild, acidophilus and yogurt and kimchi and whatever. But what I was saying about this is that, at the end of nearly every ayahuasca ceremony I've ever been to, like the commercial ones at least, which isn't many, and also a lot of the more underground ones, when it's time for everyone to play and sing music at the end of the night, like coming from the California psychedelic culture, when psychedelics are introduced to a musical scenario, there is almost like an occult sense of something powerful, and the musicians will do impossible things. And if there's a group improvisation happening, it's difficult to explain, but things will happen that are just beyond belief. And unless I'm the one playing guitar, it's like just this like campy hippie music that has nothing to do with what I perceive to be the psychedelic dimension, And I wonder if it doesn't have something to do with the industry and the fact that there's been this sort of homogenization of what people think shamanism is. And there are popular sort of folky songs, and there's a certain type of personality that people think they're supposed to, that's what's supposed to emerge. And everyone starts wearing earth tone cotton clothes and dress, you know what I mean? It's a strange thing, and I don't know really quite what to make of it, or really what the solution is, I guess, except to remind everyone here, although I know I'm preaching to the choir, that shamanism, one of the great attributes of it is that it's supposed to be a fiercely individualistic path. You know, somebody actually commented. Yeah. A fiercely individualistic path, and somebody commented on something that I posted the other day saying, you know, if you're not practicing ayahuasca exactly the traditional way, then you're doing something wrong. And I happen to have studied ayahuasca in the jungle with Kofan, Quechua, Shipibo, Ashka. I didn't know them very long. It's hard to remember that. Not Ashkenazi, that's a Jew, type of Jewish person, a subspecies of Jew. What is it? Ashka, whatever. But mostly Shuar and Quechua. And I've observed ceremonies from Shipibo and others. And so my question then would be, whose traditional ayahuasca protocol? Whose? They're not the same. So, I encourage everyone out there to not fall prey to this sort of herd conformity thing that I see in the plant medicine community. It's really disappointing to me that people seem to think that they need to conform to a certain stereotype. It's like you drink ayahuasca and then you think you're supposed to be vegan and wear earth tone cotton clothes and sing 4 different medicine songs. And, I think it's worth reminding people that this is about discovering your own sovereignty, your own individuality, and embracing that and empowering that and defining that, and not becoming another copy of an imitation of a copy of an imitation of a copy of an imitation. This is really the issue with the commercialization of psychedelics, I think. When things become a trend, then people kind of lose sight of the real purpose behind it. And it can be very dangerous. It sounds innocent enough, to mimic these relatively harmless proclivities of people. But I'll give you an example of what happens when this goes too far, when people lose the connection with why they're really doing what they're doing. I recently went to the Temple of the Sun, which is an Incan holy place, or at least it was until the Catholics tore it down and attached a cathedral to the wreckage of it. I actually discovered, though, that I went to the wrong place. And I'm going to go next week, probably. We have a couple of people coming down, some friends from the States, and it gives me an excuse. There's a place called Olatambo nearby, which is supposed to be the most traditionally Incan village left in Peru, and it's only 22 minutes away, I just discovered. And the Temple of the Sun, there's another one, and it's the one that I thought I was going to, and it is totally still intact. So I'm excited about that, because this whole solar mystery, you guys know, is a huge motivator for me, and lots of progress has been made in that department lately. So anyways, what the hell was I talking about before I got on the Temple of the Sun rant? Individualism, fucking hell, I gotta rewind the stream so I can see what the fuck I was talking about. Hold on, let's see. Why is there no consensus among psychedelics about spirituality, cosmology? If psychedelics are supposed to raise consciousness, why do they end up with different... Oh, here you go. That's what I was talking about. Thank you so much for that question, Manny, because that is also, it shouldn't be true. This is why, for example, when people go and drink ayahuasca with a certain group, they generally will just accept whatever they're told. Like, Pachamama's female. Okay, well, the Quechua say that the vine is male and the Chaliponga is female. So it depends on who you're talking to. Why is that if it's objectively true, right? So let's go back to my story about the Inca and the sun and all that. So the Inca had tremendous quantities of gold. They had gold bowls, gold eating utensils. They had solid gold animal statues that were life-size. They would plaster the walls with gold. They would tell their stories in gold bas reliefs. Is that how you say that? Bas relief or bas relief? I don't really know. I've only seen it written down. I've never heard anyone say it. But they had no monetary value attached to it. It was purely to surround themselves with the energy of the sun. They knew that our consciousness comes from the sun. They knew that our life comes from the sun. They knew why they considered gold holy. The Catholics came along. They also worship the sun, right? I probably don't need to explain to you guys that, Jesus saying, "I am the light of the world," was him literally saying that I'm just an allegory for the sun. The 3 days on the cross, the 3 days on the southern cross of the sun, and on and on. I mean, the sun stops moving for 3 days, so it dies for 3 days, starts moving again, it's resurrected. There's tons and tons, the light reflecting on water, Jesus walking on water. They worship the sun, but they don't know it. So that connection to the truth resonates in every cell in their body. So they're deeply committed to this belief system because there's something in them that knows they sense the truth that has been veiled in myth. And so they have this absolute insane conviction, but they don't know why. The purpose, the connection, the meaning has been extracted from it. And so you have this motivator without purpose, and that's the difference between like the Aztecs that understood duality, and they also really treasured gold, but in the same way. It was not the sweat of the sun god, but it was crystallized sunlight in the Western mystery tradition, which actually comes from Syria, Babylonia, down to Egypt and Greece. They all understood that gold was crystallized sunlight or consciousness. And so I think what Manny was asking about how, if psychedelics reveal the truth, why is it that people end up with all these different cosmologies and all this kind of stuff? Because of cultural programming, because of preconceptions, because of intellectual laziness. The Western mystery tradition and scientific illuminism, the reason that they're so powerful and effective at developing people into real spiritual entities with actual, demonstrable powers and insights and that authenticity that you don't see in new agey plant medicine people or, a lot of just hippies that just take psychedelics. It's not as simple as just taking psychedelics. You have to deprogram the entire Judeo-Christian influence. You have to deprogram all of your political programming. You have to then observe the universe with clarity and without superstition and without mythology and without undue influence from other cultures. When people go and drink with a tribe, like I was saying before, they generally adopt, their cosmology of what the spirits are and they take them as being real. And if you actually talk to the shamans, they don't necessarily even perceive them as objectively real. So, there's a lot that's lost in translation as well. When I say spirit coming from this culture, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to a Shuar person. So, there's a lot of, it's not really cultural appropriation, but, I was lucky enough to have teachers that reinforced this and told me, you don't want to adopt our cosmology and our belief system. Do not watch the hands of your master. He would always tell me all the time, do not watch the hands of your master. Learn the techniques and the reasons, but do not imitate, and don't adopt beliefs that are not your own. And so I think that there's a lot of that that pollutes. You really have to forget everything that you have learned, and you have to extract the most important, learn to separate the wheat from the chaff from every different system. Learn to be objective, learn not to be attached to ideas, and one of the hardest things I think for people is to retain the Western scientific, critical, skeptical state of mind, but also be open to possibilities that transcend what is generally accepted within that culture. You know, there is more to the universe. It's not entirely wrong, you know, like evolution, for example, is real, but it's not the whole story. Obviously, there's some kind of intelligence that is integrated into the substructure of nature, you know? So a lot of it is that, you know, one of the practices in the Western mysteries is to take any idea that you have and then generate the opposite and then combine them and whatever arises from that. This is the alchemical process. You put two things of opposing nature together, and whatever is generated by them is of a higher nature, and it is the quintessence of those things, the spirit of those things, you know? And there's a lot that is misinterpreted, I think, from the magical traditions, the Western magical traditions. This I blame also on the Judeo-Christian thing and the religious modality of thinking like, okay, I'm going to memorize this text, and that's what my spirituality is knowing all this crap that this book says, but not really knowing what it means, right? So you have in the Western mysteries this idea of 4 elements, and it's pretty ubiquitous. There's 3 elements, actually, in a lot of the like indigenous cultures and the more ancient cultures. But, you know, we're familiar with these 4 elements. And, but then also we have air of water, fire of water, earth of air. And people sort of memorize these tables and stuff, and they don't go beyond that and really think, well, what does this actually mean in the real world? Well, if you apply the element of fire or heat to earth in the form of metal, what happens? The metal becomes water. That's water of earth. When water freezes, that's earth of water. When water evaporates, that's air of water. And so just becoming aware of how everything contains everything else and these sort of dualistic inherent principles of everything trains your mind. Like once you have learned to see these various aspects and these contradictory expressions of everything, you see it in everything else. So I guess, Manny, the answer to your question is that we don't have a system of, I don't want to say hierarchy, because that implies that someone's in charge, and I don't really like that. I think one of the huge errors of our psychological disposition in this culture is that we have this thing of like, you know, swooning over presidents and looking for saviors and like putting shamans up on a pedestal and stuff. You are equal to the Most High God, so you don't need to put other humans on a pedestal. You know, so I don't like the idea of hierarchy, but we don't have a system of, say, elders, and people don't have access to real teachers because the influence of outdated, outdated, obsolete belief systems is still very prevalent. We have the profit motive that's been added into everything. So, for example, one of the reasons I think the plant medicine scene has become so hippy-dippy is because people are trying to sell stuff to people. And so, you know, everyone wants to focus on the light and ignore the darkness because that's much more marketable. And that is not an effective strategy for spiritual growth and true illumination and knowledge. You have to learn holistically. You have to develop holistically. And, you know, we don't have that. And also we have a lot of sort of like people have been pushed too far in one direction, so their response is to fall too far, and you know they bounce back further than they should. And so we had this excessively materialistic, shallow, capitalism based. Not that I'm like fundamentally against capitalism, but the sort of unchecked capitalism, but the whole materialist thing, too far. So then they want to reject science and they want to reject critical thinking. And people say, you can't come to spiritual knowledge through the mind. I think that's the worst advice that you could possibly give someone. You have to balance the pentagram. You have to develop every area equally, in order to make the kind of progress that results in an objective perception of what the universe actually is and your place and role in it, So I guess the short answer would be it's sort of lack of guidance and training and bad guidance and bad training that leads to this difference in cosmology. And I would also point out, and maybe it's going to sound arrogant, there's nothing I can do about that, but when I look at the most brilliant people that have the habits that they need to have, like Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, Terence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, I'm sure there are others. They do have the same cosmology. They do have the same message. They do get the same understanding. The people in the Grateful Dead, another great example. They do come away with exactly the same perception of what the wiring under the board actually is. So, I would say that when you see all of these people getting different messages from psychedelics, all of that stuff that I just outlined is the reason why that happens. The reality is that, spirituality is not subjective. Your experience is subjective. This is one of the huge injustices that, like, the New Age movement, motivated by wanting to make marketable concepts, they have really got people repeating that the universe and truth and all of these things are far more subjective than they actually are. There's only one objective truth on every level. And in my experience, with any required change can be affected by applying the proper kind and degree of force to the proper object through the proper medium. If you fulfill all of those things, then you will get the change. So if you apply that to spiritual growth and illumination and metaphysical understanding, there is only one objective reality. And, this is something, the popularity of these ideas, that people really like the idea of that if you can just imagine some shit, your reality is just going to conform to it. And that's true to an extent. But in the interest of marketability, people have really oversold that concept. In fact, as I started talking about it, I noticed we lost a number of viewers in the vertical because people don't want to hear it. These are comforting illusions. A lot of people had paid money to be convinced of this stuff. And like I said, it's not necessarily totally untrue, but it has been exaggerated and sort of oversold. So, okay, anybody else got questions, topics for me to riff on? I'll give you guys a minute to think of something. By the way, do hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider joining our Patreon. We are at 95. If we can get 5 more, we will hit 100. Well, there's a free member, so we are at 96, I think. Yep, 96. 4 more. But, it's fine to join at the free member, but you will not get access to the patron-only voice chat that we have every Monday night, or the Forbidden Knowledge streams, and the 5 years of patron-only content that is available to people at the $10 tier or higher. Questions, topics, going once, going twice. All right, well, in that case, unless something pops up while I'm saying my goodbyes, thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, join the Patreon to support the channel. We're demonetized, so we're completely dependent upon support from the community in order to thrive and to continue making videos. I'm sure I'll have plenty to talk about after the San Pedro experience tomorrow. I'm planning on drinking a relatively strong dose and then the Oppo at the end. I imagine it's going to be pretty interesting. So let's see. Thanks again. Yeah. All right, guys. Good night. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and buena suerte.